Welcome to the Superhuman Ascension Podcast. My name is Caulen Lauria. I'm your host. Here we discuss consciousness, neuroscience, biohacking, and a lot more. And we bring on extraordinary guests who are on the path of becoming a superhuman and supporting those who are doing the same thing, who have transformed in extraordinary ways to who they are today. And today we have Nurse Doza of MSW Lounge. We're going to be hosting this here at the Ascension Brain and Cryo Bodywork Superhuman Supercharged Wellness Facility here in Austin, Texas. And we've got lots to cover. It's going to be an exciting one. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me here. This is cool.
This is actually, I want to just jump in.
Yeah.
I like to call Nurse Doza the Jeff Goldblum of Boston.
I told you to say that.
But no, I actually came up with that.
I know you did.
Originally, when we did our podcast a long time ago for How Do You Health, which is his podcast, which you should take a look more into. He does that with Baldo, his partner, as well. So, yeah, excited to have you on, man.
We actually talked about this yesterday. I was excited to jump on because you have a very unique approach to health, and you talk about holistic health when it comes to becoming superhuman. And just before we started this, one of the reasons why I like coming to Cryo Bodyworks is because you provide a multidisciplinary approach to holistic health. And for people who don't know what holistic health is just looking at the entire body. You connect the dots. That's the most simple way to look at it, right? I myself have 2 different healthcare licenses. I'm a nurse practitioner as well as a chiropractor. And I know traditional, and you mentioned the alternative, which it's kind of weird to say that's the alternative now, because I think it's almost mainstream now that people are becoming more aware that there's another option. So it's not necessarily the alternative, it's just another option. And I think when it comes to holistic care, if you look at options, you're basically taking control of your own health. And imagine people who come to your place here, or they take your supplements, they're saying, all right, I care enough about my health that I'm going to approach it with a different option than what I'm being told is, the traditional form of health. And so the holistic side for me is doing things like cryotherapy and doing things like addressing the mental wellness, which I'm sure your supplements address as well. I'm sure you've already heard people say, things like, this has helped me with focus. I mean, you were talking about energy earlier. It's a way to be truly able to live a healthy, quality life. I mean, that's what I'm after. I know that's what you're after, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the whole concept of becoming superhuman is extending life and the quality of life.
Yeah.
And using all of the natural resources that are just already available and accessible. I think one thing that I like to consider when it comes to like a holistic approach, of course, because my background is training athletes and sustaining those careers past the age of 30, when everything really starts to break down because we're, just demolishing the body in such extreme ways. We have to take a different approach to making sure that we're taking care of our bodies at a cellular level. And one of the laws that I like to reference is the Pfeiffer's Law, which is that for every benefit that a drug seeks to provide, there is a natural substance that will provide the same effect. And that's something that you guys do extraordinarily well at MSW Lounge in terms of your vitamin lounge and all of the approach that you take for providing people with these brilliant natural remedies that provide extraordinary health.
Thank you.
And we're in extraordinary times with COVID, where we need to look at all of the things that are going to support, our health from the ground up. And I think right now we're in just a really great period of time where we have a really a fairly harmonious balance of Eastern medicine and Western medicine.
Yep.
There's a little bit more mindfulness going into what works in the Western world and what doesn't. And when people are exposed to the types of side effects that a lot of pharmaceuticals bring on, they're unwilling to take that path. And so they're finding the alternative methods, which are totally mainstream now.
Yeah.
And so you guys are blowing up. I'm super happy about that. But I'd like to know a little bit more about, how you arrived to that.
It was out of a necessity. You mentioned, the idea that we have people who are listening to another option, trying a different approach. They may be taking traditional medication. I was trained in that, so I know what the traditional sense looks like. And I always wanted to know the other option, right? Like if I said I'd take a medication, there has to be a natural version, just like you said. I completely agree. What we've learned now throughout the course of lifetime and history, there's been cultures that have used plant medicine for years. And I firmly believe that everything we ever needed in order to heal the body was already provided for us on this earth. And if we look at nature to give us the source of medicine, every medication even today comes from a source in nature. White willow bark is aspirin, and boswellia can also be a natural, steroid as well. But you look at like even mushrooms, for example, and cordyceps, like a lot of those things like lion's manes are basically necessity for adaptation to help the body thrive. And if you look at the cannabinoid system, which is incredible, we just now are discovering this after thousands of years.
The endocannabinoid.
Endocannabinoid, sorry. When you look at that, it was designed for our bodies. And so when you question the idea, THC, CBD, whatnot, you say, well, it was already like designed for us. There was a reason why it's growing on Earth. Mm-hmm. The way that man basically counter-interacts nature is basically synthesizes it and makes a chemical derivative of it. And that's where it becomes tricky. And I think that's where it can go haywire. And in the traditional sense, that's where medication comes into play. I don't think you have a deficiency in things like Prozac. I think you have a deficiency in B vitamins that could cause you to have symptoms like depression. Yeah. And the truth is, if we approach it from the traditional sense, we're looking at one symptom separate from another symptom. In holistic care, we're saying, no, they're connected. If you have an upset stomach and digestive tract, most likely you have mood issues. Like it just goes hand in hand because we know the serotonin comes from the duodenum, which is the small intestinal tract. If people took care of their gut more, there'd be less disease, just period. Yeah. And so whenever you try to go with that approach, people are seeking answers. And when you talked about now it's the greatest time to be a human, I completely agree. Because you have people like you, and me who are helping provide solutions like nutrition to people to help them with their overall wellness, which is, it's the best thing to do in the world, right? It makes you have a great feeling that you're helping somebody, right?
Yeah, it's for sure. There's something about solving these little specific areas of our wellness that cascade into many other benefits, right? Looking at, for sure, anxiety and depression and where that's coming from and the correlation that has to our gut. And I've been mentioning this on our podcast from day one, which is people need to start to understand how our mind is affected by our gut. We've got this vagus nerve, and that's transmitting all these synapse-firing hormones, 95% of our serotonin. Lots about this biochemistry, and that's kind of why I wanted to bring you on for, this is going to be one of many podcasts because you've got such a wealth of knowledge about biochemistry, and I think this is just going to be a really good learning opportunity for myself and all of our viewers. When you're talking about the endocannabinoid system, the conversation that we're beginning to have about CBD, fortunately, its adoption and acceptance nationwide has just exploded. But there's a lot of confusion as to what CBD is. And, CBD is something that we've offered at Cryo Bodyworks for like 5 years. But what I've seen is there's just so many different derivatives of CBD, so many different kinds. But going back to just what nature is providing, there's only so many ways you can reinvent the wheel. Nature already has what it is. And so, people come in and they look for all types of different gummies and in different forms, and that's great, but we focus really just on the medicinal form of the product. There's only so many ways that you can reinvent it, because when you're looking at like CBD, you have the endocannabinoid system, right? And there's these receptor sites that we're designed for. We've evolved with those receptor sites. And when people are getting like certain different types of CBD, a lot of times they've extracted just a few of the molecules from the plant, and now you're just getting CBD1 and CBD2, and you're missing out on all 16 molecules of the plant. So we focus on just like one specific form of CBD, which is a full plant extraction that's full spectrum. And that way you're getting all 16 molecules of the plant, and you're getting all the amino acids, terpenes, zinc, iron, all of the great minerals that the plant already provides. And that's just going to give that entourage effect. So I encourage people to take a look at all of the things that MSW offers, because I so believe in it. And I see the difference that people are having coming to your facility, where they're able to actually get full blood tests and really identify from a scientific point of view where their body is finding deficiencies. And you guys are so knowledgeable on how to address those. So,
well, thank you. Going back to kind of what you talked about with the CBD and kind of what we do, you're talking biochemistry, and it's just kind of my love language here, because it's when people were studying biology back in high school, I was looking at the diagrams and drawing them in my head and drawing them at home and learning these really funny words that wound up being really important 10 years down the road. And then 15 down the road, 15 years, I understand what they actually do. And I'm like, wow, this is incredible. This is how we function. So when you talk about things like receptors on something like, the lining of your intestinal tract, what's interesting about it is if you look at what nature has provided us, I'm going to take resveratrol, for example.
Resveratrol.
And resveratrol is an antioxidant, and typically you can get it in berries. So when people say a glass of red wine is supposed to be really good for you, it's true, because the antioxidants that you find in red wine is resveratrol, comes from grapes. So you want like grapes and citrus fruits and berries and all that, but like peanuts are completely made of resveratrol, which is incredible. So the extraction process is that when I extract that from the berries and the grapes, I don't really need to do a lot with it. Like, it's already perfect the way it is, because some guys or lady some years ago said, hey, you got a problem with something? Took it from the plant, mashed it up, mixed it with something, and said, there you go, you should be good. Because Baldo told me this happened with his grandmother. He was in Mexico, and he had an acid burn on his arm. And he said he was a little kid, and he was there with his grandma, and he kept talking about his grandma. Was like, I don't know why you have that thing on your arm still. And he was like, God, it's a burn. She was, come here. So she goes to the backyard, and she picks all these plants off, makes this cream out of it, puts it on there. And if you look at his arm to this day, there's no scar at all.
Wow.
He said it was gone after that. And he says, I still don't remember what it was that she gave me. And so if you go into Peru and you look at all the 200 million species of mushrooms that are down there, and the plants and the different vegetables that we don't even know about, that are growing. Imagine if you can extract those for medicinal purposes, you wouldn't need to do a whole lot with them, right? Like, we were designed to eat these things, because when you eat vegetables and fruits, you're taking the nutrients and the minerals and the natural elements you need out of the earth. And the real problem is if you're eating right and you're eating a very sustainable diet and you're still deficient in something, the question becomes, do you need a higher demand of certain substances in order to thrive, or is all your food that deficient? And that's the question I look at, because if you look at holistic health, it all comes back to food, right? Nutrition. We only eat because we need nutrients in order to make hormones, neurotransmitters, and antioxidants in order to fight off stress, because stress will eventually cause inflammation and disease or disease. That's true health. You should be focusing on trying to reduce inflammation every day of your life.
Yeah, right, because we have a constant amount of cancerous cells building up in our body. That's just how it works. They will be produced, and so our job is to have that anti-inflammatory lifestyle where we're just winning the battle every moment. We have, more cells, more healthy cells being produced than bad cells. And so taking that holistic approach of, how many different ways can we do that? There's just limitless ways.
Yep.
And you only have to do it in a few ways to make an impact on the rest of your health.
Yeah.
And so, the fun things that we like to do here, whether it's ice baths or whether it's cryotherapy or, saunas, we're using advanced saunas here in the form of infrared, right? And so we like to educate people on, how physics influences our body at a cellular level. And everybody's heard the term infrared, but they don't really know what it is. And so the way that we like to educate people about infrared here is that it is the power of the sun with no ultraviolet. So you have a very specific spectrum of light, and that actually, at a biochemistry level, comes in and feeds the living organism that is the makeup of all of our cells. It's the mitochondria. It's the powerhouse of the cell, right? Well, now in the last 10 years, we're having this mitochondrial revolution, and people are starting to understand, we really need to make sure these living organisms, these 40 trillion organisms that are in our body, are happy. And we're not just stimulating them from light, because when our body is exposed to that light, they're stimulated to produce adenosine triphosphate. It's like, well, where's that in this whole puzzle piece of the human body? Well, adenosine triphosphate is the precursor to DNA production, right? So if we have our mitochondria, topped off with fuel, at least from light, from a standpoint of being exposed to the elements, then we've solved one part of that equation. Now we just need to make sure that we're feeding the cell with really high quality nutrients and making sure that we're getting nutrient dense, mineral rich foods. And we can talk about how we're getting the proper level of nutrient dense intake, because there's a lot that I've put into Ascension Brain to make sure that we're rounding out our diet, because a lot of the nutrients a lot of the foods that we're taking from or that we're eating are void in a lot of nutrients, unfortunately. A lot of the soil that food is grown on is unfortunately deficient, and so that's something that we want to talk about. But if you want to jump in about the mitochondria, I think that's this is the mitochondrial revolution that we're in, and I know that you've got more to talk about on that.
Yeah, this is the thing I've been studying so much about the last 4 or 5 months, and even the last, like I said, 10, 15 years. The more I understand labs, the more I understand biochemistry, the more I understand mitochondria. So the mitochondria is the powerhouse of ATP production, like Caulen said. It's ATP is our currency of energy. If you want to say, how can I survive a day? How can I withstand stress? How can I walk around? How can I climb up steps? You need ATP. And your cells have to make a lot of it all the time. Like as we are speaking right now, you're making ATP. And you need a lot of ATP to maybe beat blood through the heart and push it out to the rest of the body, or maybe synapse neurons in the brain. So what will happen over time is that you have a deficiency in ATP production because your cell demand turnover is not happening. Your cells just die off because that's what happens in life, right? Aging means that your cells are not as healthy as they once were. Your body's supposed to produce new cells. I mean, you shed skin cells every day, right? I mean, that's why you see dandruff flying off of you. And then you make new hair cells, like new skin cells. You just do that. You make new oxygen. You make your own water, like from the mitochondria. Like your body just does that, which is incredible. So then over time, you kind of think, all right, well, what am I doing to nourish the mitochondria that loves me so much, that keeps me alive and thrives? Well, we're not talking about that because we don't look that deep into the body when it comes to health, unfortunately. In medicine, we don't even look at the mitochondria. We look on a superficial level. You have a cut and it's not healing correctly, they're going to say, well, let's put a steroid and an antibiotic on it. My question is, well, why is the skin not healing as well? It should have been clotting. It should have been completely healed. You should not have staph infection. That should have been gone a week ago.
There it is.
Right? So then we say, what's going on internally where the body can't rejuvenate on itself? Because when you talk about it being superhuman, let me tell you something about the liver. The liver is the only organ, when it's completely healthy, if you cut it in half, it'll regenerate completely. There's no other organ that can do that. Okay?
That's remarkable.
Now, you talk about antioxidants. Glutathione, which is the body's most powerful antioxidant, I guess you could make, it's made in the liver. It crosses the blood-brain barrier, it detoxifies the brain. It can reduce inflammation in the body. It's what we give for people to help boost their immune system right now. Imagine if those approaches were emphasized to help rejuvenate cells. It wouldn't matter what type of diagnosis you had. It didn't matter if you're diabetic, Alzheimer's, irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's. It basically say, like, you have inflammation. We need to stomp out the fire. and allow the body the nutrients it needs in order to start healing itself on its own. So when you go to the mitochondria, you're going to something that's so profound that this is what you're really looking at. When it comes to the term biohacking, if anyone ever says, what does biohacking really mean? They're going to give you all kinds of ideas. The term optimization will be followed with biohacking, because biohackers basically want to optimize and live forever. They don't want to die because they love life and they want to get the most out of it, which I completely agree. I don't subscribe to the idea that we're just going to die by the time we're 100, or not even going to live to 100. I'm going to live to at least 120. I'm sure you're going to live to at least 120. I mean,
I'm going for more than that.
See, right there. So what's your age limit? What are you thinking?
Well, lots of ancient wisdom talks about how people in ancient times have lived for hundreds of years, even thousands of years. If you look at all the things that are talked about with the emerald tablets of the time of the Atlanteans, through Thoth and Horlet of Unal, this is a different way of thinking. It's like, now it's like, 80 years old, 100 years old, that's the end of life. I reject that.
Yep.
I completely reject that. And just by solving one of these little biochemical puzzle pieces, I think we can extend that dramatically and then manage our inflammation like you're talking about.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, then if you go back to the idea, because I even read about this guy from China who lived at least 250.
Yeah.
Okay. And there was actual, like, the New York Post or Times or whatever it was back in the day reported on it and said, like, this is true, completely true. And there was the idea that how do you basically hack longevity? You can't hack your way into better sleep. You just have to get better sleep. You can't hack your way into better hydration. You just need to drink more water, right? So then I say, okay, well, if I did hack something, what would I do? I'd hack the mitochondria, because this is how you basically manipulate your body to live longer. Stress will cause inflammation that equals dis-ease, which essentially means your telomeres, your DNA, and the strands of your chromosomes basically tether and fall apart. Antioxidants start repairing it. And if you can start promoting regenerative medicine, your body has the ability to regenerate DNA on its own. Things like the methylation cycle can do it. Things like NAD can do it, CoQ10. So if you promote longevity, I'm promoting mitochondrial biogenesis. Rejuvenation is one thing. If I can go into the mitochondria, let's take cognitive decline. Cognitive decline means that mitochondria in that brain cell, that neuron, is diminished, which means it's not pumping out as much ATP, and there's sure as hell not a synapses between one neuron to the next. So that mitochondria is dysfunctional, and it's a mitochondrial disease. If I rejuvenate that mitochondria, I'm going to give myself NAD. I'm going to give myself resveratrol. I'm going to give myself ice baths. I'm going to give myself a calorie-restrictive diet, because all that's going to promote autophagy, which is basically cell debridement and clearing the detoxification of the mitochondria. It's basically breathing CPR and life back into the mitochondria to start pumping out ATP again. Yeah. When that happens, if you do that enough and you detoxify that whole area, now you have a completely rejuvenated cell that then activates this other gene that promotes something called mitochondrial biogenesis. Oh. Now, mitochondrial biogenesis is different than rejuvenation. Rejuvenation, you're trying to fix the thing. Now you completely rejuvenate it, and now it's ready to thrive. So when you have mitochondrial biogenesis, you can promote the spawning and new production of a whole new mitochondria. So when that happens, there's a gene called PGC1 alpha. That's the master gene that you have to unlock mitochondrial biogenesis. And every biohacker should know that gene and tattoo it on their arm, because that's the goal, to promote longevity to 1,000 or 2,000 years. Because if you activate those genes throughout your entire body, who knows how long you live for? PGC1 alpha.
1 alpha. Hear that? Write it down. Two things I want to talk about, which you briefly just went into, and this will wrap up our podcast for this episode, which is going to be telomeres, epigenetics, and consciousness influence on those things, as well as the blood-brain barrier. So we'll start first with the blood-brain barrier, because that's a term you probably heard, maybe not. But what is that? How would you help educate all of us about the blood-brain barrier?
In your head, you have your cranium, which is your skull, and it's bone. Underneath that, you have a little bit of padding, and then you have this big gap of open space. And then between the open space and the brain, you have, the skull, open space, brain. That's the layers of your head. That space in between the skull and the brain has fluid in it. And that fluid is padding because whenever you shake your head or whatever, that brain can't move around and smack against the skull, right? Well, the blood-brain barrier is the lining of that fluid around the brain that protects anything from getting into the brain. Because what happens with spinal fluid that surrounds the brain and goes all the way down through the spinal cord is that those carry the most vital nutrients and growth factors that you possibly need. Blood makes sure that you take all your nutrients to your muscles and your organs where you need it, but the spinal cord fluid protects the brain in so many ways. It's the vital part of the body. So the blood-brain barrier is the ultimate defense mechanism and immune layered shield. It's like a moat around your brain. And you can't just get anything. You need the password. You need a certain like wingman to get you in. Like this is the ultimate club entrance and you cannot get in. And I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And so if disease like staph, viruses, if it gets into the brain, which it can, it's hard to get them out. Most drugs like antibiotics have a hard time traveling through the blood-brain barrier to get in there. Glutathione has no trouble. It goes straight into the blood-brain barrier without causing damage because it was designed to do that. The blood-brain barrier, on a side note, the same tissue that basically provides this layer, this lining, is very similar to the same, if not the exact same tissue that you would find in your intestinal lining.
Interesting.
So leaky gut equals leaky brain.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, if you're looking for more ways to influence the blood-brain barrier, check out MSW Lounge. They've got fantastic things for that, including glutathione, as well as Ascension Brain. One of the things that we've included in this, apart from glutathione, is astaxanthin, and that's another fantastic, very special, it's an algae-based ingredient that helps that. So it is coming in our next formulation. But
can I say something about your supplement?
Sure,
quick?
yeah.
So just for people who are listening and following, the Ascension Brain here, I know supplements, obviously, right? So this is a great supplement. The ingredients that are in here, it's a multivitamin for optimization. It's a multivitamin for mitochondrial health. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So if somebody comes up to you and says, well, I take a multivitamin, I'm like, well, do you take a multivitamin for your mitochondria? Because I think that's what Ascension Brain is.
It's funny because the multivitamin aspect of Ascension Brain was secondary. It's just, it is a multivitamin, but primarily that we developed this as, something to improve cognition. But it's also a multivitamin,
yeah.
So it's kind of helpful that way. Thank you so much for all this information. Last thing I want to talk about is epigenetics.
Yes.
In the last 10 years, we've been able to identify through the Human Genome Project lots of different ways for identifying, switching on our genes. Mm-hmm. And I've had a lot of conversations about how only about 5%, Dr. Joe Dispenza, Bruce Lipton, and Greg Braden, they talk about how if you are understanding science where it is today, only about 5% of our genes are predetermined. So when you're looking at like family history and things like that, you have an opportunity to change that. Only about 5% are fixed. And so there's a consciousness component to understanding our longevity and turning on the DNA, which is previously known as junk DNA, but it's actually our own ability to reprogram ourselves and turn on the genes that we want to be active. And so, there's
I love that. Your family genetics are the 5% of what defined you. The 95% of your genes are actually made up of what goes on throughout the course of a lifetime. You can flip genes on and you can turn them off. The incredible thing about it is negative and positive thoughts can flip genes on and off too. Yeah. So this placebo effect that Dispenza always talks about is true. The body is so powerful that you can literally heal yourself with just your positive thoughts alone. Because I've met so many people, and you have too, that said, I willed myself back to health because no one else told me I could. I had to believe it. So the level of consciousness is this. If you raise your level of vibration in your body, you can achieve and have conversations and experiences you've never thought possible. Because between the levels of 600 to 1,000, when it comes to level of consciousness, 1,000 being the highest, your sole purpose at that point is for the betterment of humankind. So what kind of conversations will you have then with people? You take things like this, I believe it raises your level of consciousness and your vibration. And so the true form of health in the future is that we'll all be looking at ourselves as just balls of energy that vibrate.
Yeah, we are.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Nurse Doza. It's a pleasure to have you on. It's a pleasure to be your friend. Thank you so much. And we'll see you here for the next episode of the Superhuman Ascension Podcast. Be well.